The diplomatic hall buzzed with nervous energy as delegates from across the galaxy gathered for the first intergalactic peace summit on Station Harmony. Commander Lisa Morgan stood near the observation deck watching ships from dozens of worlds dock at the massive space station. She had spent 3 months preparing for this moment, studying alien cultures, learning basic phrases in 17 different languages, and memorizing the diplomatic protocols that might keep humanity from making a fatal mistake. She had been chosen to represent humanity not because of her military rank, but because of her ability to stay calm under pressure. The selection committee had reviewed hundreds of candidates before settling on her. They needed someone who would not panic when faced with species that could destroy Earth with a single weapon, someone who could look at the impossible and find a way forward. The other human delegates whispered anxiously behind her, pointing at the various alien species that walked past. Some were tall and crystalline, their bodies refracting light into rainbow patterns. Others were small and feathered, communicating in musical chirps that the translation devices struggled to interpret. There were beings made of living metal creatures that floated in spheres of contained atmosphere, and species so strange that human eyes could barely process their forms. But none drew more attention than the Zarathi. The Zarathi were a warrior race known throughout the galaxy for their strength and their pride. They stood nearly 8 feet tall with scales that shimmered like liquid silver and eyes that glowed with an inner fire. Their bodies were built for combat with dense muscle and natural armor plating that could deflect most energy weapons. They moved with a grace that seemed impossible for creatures so large. Their empire spanned 40 star systems, and their military had never lost a war. They were respected, feared, and avoided by most other species. The fact that they had agreed to attend this summit at all was considered a diplomatic miracle. Most species believed the Zarathi would simply ignore the gathering, as they had ignored similar events for the past century. Lisa had read everything available about them in the human database, which was not much. The Zarathi rarely communicated with other species, preferring to keep to themselves. When they did interact, it was usually to deliver ultimatums or declarations of war. They viewed most other races as weak, unworthy of their time or attention. Their leader, Kira Zhen, walked into the hall with the confidence of someone who had conquered worlds. She wore armor that seemed to be made of the same silver material as her scales, decorated with symbols that Lisa guessed represented military victories. Her presence filled the space, making even the largest delegates seem small by comparison. Lisa watched as other delegates stepped back, creating a path for the Zarathi leader. She noticed how even the most powerful ambassadors seemed small in comparison. The Thexian ambassador, who represented a species known for their diplomatic skill, actually bowed his head as Kira Zhen passed. The Vorlian trade minister, a being who controlled the commerce of 12 sectors, moved aside quickly. Kira Zhen moved through the crowd like a predator, scanning each species with barely concealed disdain. Her glowing eyes passed over the various delegates, dismissing most with a single glance. When she looked at the insectoid Krex delegation, she made a sound that the translators interpreted as disgust. When she saw the plant-based Florians, her expression showed complete indifference. Behind Lisa, the human delegates were having a quiet panic. Ambassador Chen, who was supposed to be the lead diplomat, was visibly shaking military liaison. Brooks kept his hand near his sidearm, even though weapons were supposed to be ceremonial only. Cultural expert Rodriguez was whispering prayers in Spanish. Lisa understood their fear. She felt it too, coursing through her veins, making her heart beat faster. But she had learned long ago that fear was just information. It told you something was dangerous, but it did not have to control your actions. When those glowing eyes landed on Lisa, something shifted in the air. The temperature seemed to drop. The background noise of the hall faded. The Zarathi leader changed direction, walking straight toward the human section with deliberate steps that echoed on the metal floor. Other human delegates tensed. Ambassador Chen actually took a step backward. Brooks' hand tightened on his weapon. Rodriguez stopped praying and started holding his breath. But Lisa stood her ground, keeping her expression neutral. She had learned that body language often spoke louder than words. Kira Zhen stopped directly in front of her, towering over the human commander. At this distance, Lisa could see details she had not noticed before. The intricate patterns in the Zarathi scales, the way her eyes seemed to burn with an actual inner light, the faint scars that marked her armor from countless battles. The entire hall went silent. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Delegates from dozens of worlds turned to watch. Everyone knew the Zarathi, viewed most species as inferior. They had refused to attend previous summits, calling other races weak and unworthy. Their presence here was already surprising, but approaching another delegation voluntarily was unprecedented. The tension was suffocating. Lisa could feel hundreds of eyes watching this moment. The fate of human galactic relations might depend on the next few seconds. One wrong word, one misunderstood gesture, and humanity could find itself with an enemy they could not possibly defeat. Kira. Jen looked down at her with those burning eyes studying her like a specimen under a microscope. Lisa could see the intelligence behind that gaze. This was not a simple warrior, but a strategist, someone who had led armies and ruled worlds. The Zarathi leader tilted her head slightly, a gesture that seemed almost predatory. Then the Zarathi leader spoke, her voice carrying across the silent hall. Despite not being particularly loud, "You look great today." The words hung in the air, strange and unexpected. The translation devices checked and rechecked, making sure they had interpreted correctly. Delegates from other worlds exchanged confused glances. Some began whispering behind their hands, trying to understand what had just happened. The human diplomats behind Lisa looked terrified. Ambassador Chen's face had gone pale. Brooks looked ready to draw his weapon. Rodriguez had started praying again. Some were unsure if this was an insult in disguise or a threat in an alien language they did not fully understand. Lisa felt every instinct telling her to be diplomatic, to thank the alien leader politely, and move on, to deflect and defer the way she had been trained. But something in Kira Jen's eyes told her this was a test, not a pleasantry. The Zarathi respected strength, not pleasantries. This warrior race had crushed civilizations that showed weakness. They had destroyed species that groveled before them. They viewed submission as contempt worthy. She could see it in the way Kira Jen held herself, in the way those burning eyes watched for any sign of fear. So Lisa made a choice that would change everything. She smiled, not a diplomatic smile, but a genuine one, looked directly into those glowing eyes without flinching, without fear, and said, "Thanks, I know." The silence that followed was deafening. Several delegates gasped audibly. The Thexian ambassador looked like he might faint. The Vorlian trade minister eyes widened to twice their normal size. Even the usually stoic Krex delegation showed signs of shock, their antennae standing straight up. Others looked horrified at what they perceived as suicidal arrogance. The plant-based Florians wilted slightly as if expecting violence. The crystalline Shardborn dimmed their natural glow, backing away from what they assumed would be a massacre. Kira Jen's expression did not change for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 3 seconds. The human delegates behind Lisa looked ready to faint. Brooks actually did draw his weapon halfway, before catching himself. Then something remarkable happened that no one in that hall would ever forget. Kira Jen threw back her head and laughed. It was a sound like thunder rolling across mountains, deep and genuine and completely unexpected. The sound echoed through the diplomatic hall, bouncing off the high ceilings and metal walls. It was not a polite diplomatic chuckle, but a real laugh full of genuine amusement and something that might have been respect. The Zarathi warriors behind their leader looked shocked. Their silver scales actually changed color slightly, darkening with what might have been embarrassment or confusion. They had served under Kira Jen for decades, some for their entire adult lives, and they had rarely heard her laugh. Never at a diplomatic function, never in front of other species, and certainly never because of something another species had said. The entire hall erupted in shocked murmurs. Delegates who had been holding their breath suddenly started breathing again, but their confusion only deepened. No one had ever spoken to a Zarathi leader like that, and lived to tell about it. The diplomatic protocols they had all memorized said nothing about this situation. The Thexian ambassador turned to his aide and whispered urgently, "What just happened?" The aide could only shake his head, unable to answer. The Vorlian trade minister was already composing a report to send back to his homeworld, knowing that no one would believe what he had just witnessed. Some delegates looked angry. The Krex delegation chittered among themselves, clearly insulted that a species as young and primitive as humanity had earned a response they could never achieve. The Florians seemed confused, their plant-based biology not equipped to understand the nuances of what had just occurred. Others looked impressed. The Shardborn delegation began glowing brighter, their crystalline bodies reflecting their interest. A small mammalian species called the Nyx started taking notes frantically, knowing this moment would be studied for years to come, but all of them looked surprised. Every single delegate in that hall had come expecting standard diplomatic theater, boring speeches, careful words, and meaningless treaties. Instead, they were witnessing something that might change the balance of galactic power. Kira. Jen stepped closer. To Lisa, her massive form still imposing, but her demeanor completely changed. The aggression that had radiated from her moments before had shifted into something else, curiosity perhaps, or recognition. Her burning eyes studied Lisa with new interest. "You did not grovel," she said with clear approval in her voice that carried across the now silent hall. "You did not apologize for existing. You did not try to make yourself smaller. You simply agreed with an objective statement of fact." Lisa kept her composure, even though her heart was racing so fast she could hear it in her ears. "Why would I disagree with facts?" she replied, keeping her voice steady. Behind her, Ambassador Chen made a small choking sound. Brooks had completely given up on protocol and was just staring. Rodriguez had stopped praying and started smiling despite himself. They were beginning to understand that somehow, impossibly, their commander had done something right. The Zarathi leader studied her for another moment that stretched on forever. Then she nodded slowly, a gesture that seemed to carry enormous weight among her species. "Your species is small," she said, addressing not just Lisa, but all humans present, turning slightly so her voice would reach every corner of the hall. "Your worlds are few," she continued. "Your technology is primitive by galactic standards. Your ships are simple compared to most here, barely capable of faster than light travel. Your weapons could not scratch our armor. Your economy is insignificant in galactic terms. You have been part of this community for less than 2 decades, while some of us have existed for millennia." The human delegates looked crushed by these words. It was everything they had feared hearing on the galactic stage. Their worst nightmares about being seen as primitive and weak were being confirmed in front of everyone. The careful image they had tried to build of humanity as capable and worthy was being torn apart. "Ambassador." Chen's shoulders slumped. Brooks looked at the floor. Rodriguez closed his eyes. The other human staff members who had worked so hard to prepare for this summit felt all their efforts crumbling. Even Lisa felt a momentary doubt, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. But Kira Zhen continued, her voice growing, stronger, taking on a tone that demanded attention. "Yet you stand here without fear. You look at warriors who have destroyed planets and you do not blink. You face species that see you as children and you do not apologize. You know your worth even when surrounded by those who would diminish it." She turned to address the entire assembly, speaking loud enough for all to hear, making sure every delegate, every species, every world represented understood her next words. "The Zarathi have watched humanity. For decades we do not make announcements lightly. We do not offer opinions without evidence. We observe and we judge." Lisa remained still, but inside, she felt a surge of something, pride perhaps, or vindication. She knew the history Kira Zhen was referencing, even if the other delegates did not. The colony wars, when human settlers had defended their worlds against raiders with nothing but mining equipment. The plague ships, when Earth had faced a biological weapon that should have ended their species. The void incursion, when creatures from dark space had attacked and humans had fought them off, despite having no weapons designed for such enemies. The Zarathi leader gestured broadly to the other delegates, her armored hand sweeping across the assembled species. Most species here joined the galactic community because they had technology, because they had numbers, because they had power. You, she pointed at the Shardborn, had natural energy weapons. You, she indicated the Krex, had hive intelligence. You, she nodded toward the Vorlian, had economic dominance. She paused, letting the silence build before continuing. Humans joined because you refused to accept that you could not. You had none of these advantages. You were told repeatedly that you were Not ready that you should wait, that you should develop more before seeking membership. But you came anyway. You stood before the Galactic Council with ships that barely worked and demanded to be recognized. Kira Jen turned back to Lisa, her glowing, eyes intense. This is why I said you look great today, not your clothing, which is plain, not your appearance, which is unremarkable by any objective standard, but because you stand here representing a species that should by all logic be afraid. Yet, you are not. You know what you are worth, and you do not need others to validate it. The diplomatic hall remained silent, but the quality of that silence had changed. It was no longer the shocked silence of witnesses to a disaster. It was the attentive silence of people realizing they were watching history being made. The delegates leaned forward, not wanting to miss a single word. Kira Jen extended her hand to Lisa, a gesture she had never made to any other species leader in the 70 years she had ruled the Zarathi Empire. Her warriors stared in disbelief. Some of the younger ones looked ready to protest, but the veterans understood. This was not weakness. This was recognition. Lisa took the offered hand without hesitation. Their hands clasped human and alien warrior and commander, and in that moment something fundamental shifted in galactic politics. The Zarathi leader hand was warm, almost hot, and her grip was firm, but not crushing. She was not trying to intimidate, but to acknowledge. The Zarathi Empire recognizes humanity as equals, Kira Jen announced, her voice ringing with authority. Any who wish to challenge this declaration may speak now. No one spoke. The implications were clear and immediate. The most powerful military force in the galaxy had just declared humans worthy. That declaration carried more weight than any treaty or agreement could ever hold. It was not just words, but a statement of fact backed by 40 star systems and an undefeated military. The Thexian ambassador, who had spent 50 years cultivating relationships in galactic politics, immediately understood what had happened. His species had been trying to gain Zarathi recognition. For a century they had offered trade agreements, military alliances, even tribute. Nothing had worked, yet humans had achieved it in minutes with nothing but honesty. The Vorlian trade minister was already calculating the economic implications. If the Zarathi recognized humans as equals, then trade routes would open. Technology sharing would become possible. Military protection would extend to human space. The value of human goods and services had just increased 1,000-fold. The Krex delegation was not pleased. Their species prided itself on intelligence and efficiency. They had algorithms that could predict market trends decades in advance, yet they had not predicted this. They chittered angrily among themselves, realizing their calculations about humanity had been completely wrong. But most species in that hall were simply recalculating their positions. Diplomacy was about understanding power dynamics, and the dynamics had just shifted dramatically. Species that had ignored humanity now needed to consider them. Species that had dismissed human requests would need to reconsider. Species that had planned to exploit human inexperience would need new plans. As the summit continued moving into the formal sessions, other delegates approached the human section with new respect. The Nyx ambassador, who had previously refused to meet with human representatives, now requested a private meeting. The Florian trade delegation suddenly had time in their schedule. Even the proud Shardborn indicated interest in discussions. Trade agreements were discussed that would have been impossible hours before the Vorlian offered favorable terms on rare minerals. The Nyx proposed technology exchanges. The Florians suggested agricultural partnerships that would benefit both species. Human delegates who had prepared for rejection found themselves negotiating from a position of strength. Defense pacts were proposed. Species that had viewed human space as insignificant now saw it as strategically valuable. The Zarathi Declaration meant attacking humans would mean facing Zarathi retaliation. That changed everything. Several smaller species approached about mutual defense arrangements, seeing humanity as a bridge to Zarathi protection. Cultural exchanges were planned. The crystalline Shardborn wanted to study human art, finding something appealing in its emotional depth. The musical Nyx were fascinated by human music. Theory species that had dismissed human culture as primitive now wanted to understand what the Zarathi had seen in them. But Lisa remembered that moment in the hall above all else, when a warrior from a species that valued strength above all else had tested her, and she had passed not by being humble or diplomatic, but by being honest, by refusing to diminish herself or her species, by standing firm even when facing something terrifying. The formal summit sessions were productive, but Lisa found them exhausting. Every word had to be carefully chosen. Every gesture had to be considered. She represented not just herself but all of humanity. Every mistake she made would reflect on her entire species. During a break, she stood alone on an observation deck, looking out at the stars through the massive, transparent, aluminum windows. The view was breathtaking. Dozens of ships from across the galaxy hung in space around the station, each one representing a different world, a different culture, a different way of life. She thought about Earth, about the billions of people who would never see this view, who would never meet an alien but whose lives would be affected by what happened here. The decisions made in these meetings would echo across human space for generations. Behind her she heard the distinctive sound of Zarathi armor. The heavy footsteps that somehow managed to be both loud and graceful. She did not turn around. She had learned that among Zarathi, turning to face someone could be seen as either challenge or fear, depending on context. Better, to wait later that evening as the delegates mingled during a reception, Kira found Lisa again. The Zarathi leader had removed some of her ceremonial armor and looked slightly less intimidating, though still impressive. They stood together at the observation deck looking out at the stars in companionable silence. "Your answer truly did shock everyone," the Zarathi leader said after a while. Her voice was quieter now, without the formal tone she used in public. "I have attended many diplomatic functions over the years. Most species either grovel or bluster. They make themselves small or they puff themselves up, trying to seem larger. Neither approach earns respect." Lisa smiled slightly. "I figured if I was going to make an impression, it should be an honest one. My grandmother used to say that lying about who you are just means you have to keep lying. She was a farmer, never went to school past 8th grade, but she was the wisest person I ever knew, Kira." Jen made a sound that might have been approval. "Your grandmother sounds like she would have made a good Zarathi. We value truth even when it is uncomfortable, especially when it is uncomfortable." She paused, then continued. "Most species tell us what they think we want to hear. They study our culture, try to mimic our values. It is transparent and insulting. I read about your culture," Lisa admitted, "but I figured trying to act like a Zarathi would be worse than just being human. You have probably seen 1,000 species try to impress you." "Why would one more matter exactly?" Kira said with what might have been satisfaction. "You understood something that most species never learn. We do not want copies of ourselves. We have ourselves. If we wanted more Zarathi, we would make more Zarathi. We respect others who know what they are." They watched the stars in silence for a moment. A transport ship was departing, probably carrying delegates who had finished their business. Lisa wondered what reports they would send home, what they would say about the events of the day. "Can I ask you something?" Lisa said carefully. "When you approached me today, was that planned? Did you know you were going to recognize humanity as equals, Kira?" Jen laughed, that deep, thunderous sound again. "I had no such plan. I came to this summit because the Galactic Council has been persistent in their invitations. I intended to observe, to judge, to probably leave early when I became bored. So what changed?" Lisa asked. "You did," Kira said simply. "Have been watching humanity for years, as I said. Your species interested me. You are weak by every measurable standard, yet you persist. You face obstacles that should destroy you, and you find ways to survive. I wanted to see if individual humans matched what I had observed about your species." Lisa felt a chill run down her spine, realizing how close things had come to going differently. "And if I had apologized, if I had been humble, then I would have concluded that I was wrong about humanity," Kira said bluntly. "That your persistence was luck, not character, that you were not worth my time, I would have left, and the Zarathi Empire would have continued to ignore you." The weight of that statement hung in the air. Lisa had not just been representing herself or even just the diplomatic mission. She had been representing the entire human race without knowing it. One wrong word and everything would have been different. But you did not apologize, Kira. Zhen continued. You stood there surrounded by species more powerful than yours, facing a warrior who could have killed you with one hand, and you did not flinch. You agreed that you looked great because it was true. Simple, honest, unafraid. Lisa smiled despite herself. I was definitely afraid. My heart was beating so fast I thought everyone could hear it. Good, Kira, Jen said. Fear is information. Ignoring it is stupid, but letting it control you is worse. You felt fear and acted anyway. That is courage. She paused, then added, most species confuse fearlessness with courage. They are not the same. Fearlessness is often stupidity. Courage is being afraid and doing what must be done anyway. They stood together watching ships come and go, delegates from across the galaxy moving through space. Lisa thought about her grandmother again, about simple truths and honest living. She wondered what the old woman would think seeing her granddaughter standing with an alien warrior discussing philosophy. Humans. Kira Zhen said with something like affection in her voice, You are terrifying in your confidence and you do not even realize it. You look at the impossible and you do not see barriers. You see puzzles to solve. Maybe Lisa replied thoughtfully, or maybe we just decided a long time ago that being small did not mean being less. When humans first discovered we were not alone in the universe, there was panic. Some people thought we should hide. Some thought we should wait until we were stronger. But most people just wanted to meet our neighbors. We were curious. Curiosity, Kira Jen repeated as if testing the word. Most species lose that as they grow older, as they gain power. They become comfortable, satisfied, with what they know. Humans seem to keep it no matter what. That is rare. Lisa thought about that, about all the human explorers and scientists who kept pushing boundaries, even when it was dangerous. Even when it made no practical sense. They went to space when they barely had the technology. They explored oceans before they could breathe underwater. They climbed mountains just to see what was on the other side. The Zarathi leader shifted her weight, a movement that made her armor clink softly. I should tell you something, she said, her tone becoming more serious. The other species here, many of them voted against allowing humans into the Galactic Council. They said you were too young, too primitive, too aggressive. Lisa had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed still stung. How many voted against us? Most of them. Kira Zhen said bluntly. The Thexians claimed you were not ready. The Vorlians said you would destabilize trade. The Krex calculated that you would be a net negative to galactic civilization. Even species much weaker than yours argued against your inclusion. Why are you telling me this? Lisa asked. Because you should know what you face. Kira Zhen replied. The recognition I gave you today will help, but it will also create resentment. Some species spent centuries earning less. Some will never earn it. They will not be happy that humans achieved it so quickly. Lisa nodded slowly, understanding the political complexity. So we made enemies today, along with allies. You made yourself visible, Kira Zhen corrected, before you were easy to ignore. Now you are not. That will bring both opportunities and challenges. The Zarathi Empire will honor our declaration, but we will not fight your battles for you. We respect those who stand on their own. I would not want it any other way, Lisa said, and meant it. Earning respect is better than being given it. The Zarathi leader studied her for a long moment, then nodded. You understand. This is good. Many species who gain powerful allies become dependent. They forget how to stand alone. They become weak. Lisa thought about human history, about all the times humans had stood alone against impossible odds. The colony wars had been fought with no allies. No other species had helped when the plague ships came. The Void incursion had been faced with human courage and human sacrifice alone. We have had a lot of practice standing alone, she said quietly. Maybe too much practice. Kira. Jen made that sound of approval again. You say that with regret, not pride. Most species would boast about their independence. You recognize it as both strength and weakness. You are more sophisticated than you appear. The observation deck was getting crowded as more delegates came to see the view. Lisa noticed several of them glancing in her direction, whispering to each other. She had become famous or infamous in the span of a few hours. A small delegation of Nix approached hesitantly. They were mammalian beings covered in soft fur with large eyes adapted for low, light environments. Their species was known for being cautious, rarely taking risks. Their homeworld was wealthy but isolated. "Excuse me," the lead Nix said in their musical language translated by the devices everyone wore. "We hoped we might speak with Commander Morgan if she has time." Lisa glanced at Kira Zhen, who made a gesture that might have been permission or dismissal or both. The Zarathi leader stepped back, giving them space, but did not leave entirely, of course. Lisa said warmly, trying to put them at ease. "How can I help you?" The Nix exchanged glances, clearly nervous. "We have been watching humanity for some time." The leader continued. "Your approach to problem solving is very different from ours. We calculate risk carefully. We avoid danger, when possible. But humans seem to embrace uncertainty." Lisa smiled. "That is one way to put it. We do tend to try things even when we are not sure they will work." The Nix leader nodded rapidly. "Yes, exactly. This fascinates us. We wondered if perhaps we might arrange cultural exchanges. Scientists from our world, visiting yours, teachers, perhaps students. We would like to understand this mindset." Lisa felt a surge of excitement. This was exactly the kind of opportunity the human delegation had hoped for. "Of course, I think that would be wonderful. Our scientists would love to meet yours. We could learn a lot from each other." The Nix seemed pleased, relieved even. "We will have our diplomatic staff contact yours to arrange details." "Thank you, Commander. Morgan, you have given us much to think about today." They bowed in their fashion and departed, talking excitedly among themselves. More delegations approached throughout the evening, each with different requests, different opportunities. The Florians wanted to discuss agricultural techniques. The Shardborn proposed an art exchange. A species Lisa had never heard of, called the Velm, asked about human music theory. Between meetings, Lisa found herself standing with Kira Zhen again. The Zarathi leader had stayed close, serving as an unofficial endorsement. Her presence made other species more willing to approach, more willing to take humans seriously. "You are good at this," Kira Zhen observed. "You make them comfortable without making yourself small. You listen without agreeing to everything. These are skills many diplomats never learn." Lisa shrugged. "I spent 10 years as a military commander before this. You learn to work with different personalities. In the military, you cannot just order people around. Well, you can, but good leaders do not. They listen. They adapt." The Zarathi leader tilted her head in that predatory way. "The military. Yes, I read your file. You commanded a fleet defense station. You faced the Void incursion." Lisa felt her stomach tighten at the memory. "Yes, I was there, Kira." Jen eyes seemed to glow brighter. "We studied that battle from the reports. The Void creatures should have destroyed your station. You had inadequate weapons, insufficient power, no backup. Yet you held for 6 days until reinforcements arrived." How Lisa was quiet for a moment, remembering the fear, the exhaustion, the certain knowledge that they were going to die. "We improvised," she said finally. "We used mining equipment as weapons. We vented atmosphere to push the creatures away. We even used our own ships as projectiles when we ran out of ammunition. Whatever worked. And when your ship was damaged, when you were stranded," Kira Zhen pressed. "What did you do?" Then Lisa smiled grimly. "I kept fighting. All did we knew Earth was counting on us. We knew if we failed, those things would reach civilian stations. There was no choice but to keep going." The Zarathi leader was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft. "This is why I recognized your species today. Not because you are strong by conventional measures, but because you do not quit. You face extinction, and you improvise. You adapt. You survive. Lisa met her glowing eyes. Do the Zarathi ever face things that make them want to quit once? Kira said quietly. Long ago, before I was born. The Zarathi faced a plague that killed millions. We had enemies who saw our weakness and attacked. We nearly fell as an empire. But we survived. We adapted. We became stronger. And we learned that survival matters more than pride. They stood together, two warriors from different worlds, understanding each other in a way that transcended species. The observation deck was full now with delegates from across the galaxy. But Lisa felt like she and Kira were alone in their shared understanding of what it meant to face the impossible. Ambassador Chen approached looking nervous but excited. Commander Morgan, he said, the Galactic Council has requested a formal address from humanity tomorrow. They want you to speak. Lisa felt her heart skip. A formal address in front of everyone, that is quite an honor. It is unprecedented for a species so new. Chen continued. His excitement was barely contained. This is because of what happened today. The recognition. You have opened doors we did not even know existed. Lisa looked at Kira, who smiled, showing those sharp teeth. You will do well, the Zarathi leader said. Just remember, be yourself. Do not try to be what you think they want. That is when you will. Failchin looked between them, clearly confused by their easy rapport, but he was too diplomatic to ask questions. I will have the speechwriters prepare remarks, he said. No, Lisa said firmly. If I am going to speak, it will be in my own words. The speech. Writers mean well, but they will make it sound like every other diplomatic address. I need to be honest. Kira laughed again. That is exactly right. Let the others have their careful words, their measured statements. You be human. That is what they need to hear. The next morning, Lisa stood in her quarters staring at her reflection. She had not slept much, spending most of the night thinking about what to say. A formal address to the Galactic Council was not something to take lightly. Everything she said would be recorded, analyzed, studied by billions of beings across hundreds of worlds. She had started writing notes a dozen times and discarded them all. They sounded too formal, too distant, too much like every other diplomatic speech she had ever heard. Kira words kept echoing in her mind. Be yourself, be human. A chime at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Kira standing there without her formal armor, wearing something simpler, though still clearly designed for a warrior. The Zarathi leader looked almost casual, if that word could apply to an 8-foot-tall warrior. I thought you might want company, she said. Walking into a council chamber alone can be intimidating, even for humans who do not quit. Lisa smiled. Despite everything, despite the pressure, she felt grateful. Come in, I was just trying to figure out what to say. Kira entered the small quarters, making the space seem even smaller. What have you decided? Nothing. Lisa admitted, I keep writing things down and they all sound wrong. They sound like what I think a speech should sound like, but not like something I would actually say. Good, Kira said. That means you are thinking correctly. The worst speeches are the ones that sound like speeches. They say nothing in many words. She paused, then added, when I first addressed the Zarathi Council as leader, I spent weeks preparing. I memorized every word, practiced every gesture. What happened? Lisa asked. I forgot everything the moment I stood before them, Kira said with a slight smile. So I just told them the truth. I said we were strong, but we could be stronger. I said we were proud, but pride without purpose was empty. I said I would lead them to glory or die trying, and they accepted that. They made me leader, Kira said simply. Because I did not sound like every other candidate, I sounded like myself. The council had heard 1,000 speeches promising greatness. They needed to hear honesty. Lisa sat down on her bunk, feeling the weight of the coming address. What if I say the wrong thing? What if I damage everything we have built? Then you will deal with it. Kira, Jen said, but worrying about failure is pointless. You will either succeed or fail. Worrying changes nothing. Preparation matters, action matters, worry is wasted. Energy. Lisa laughed despite herself. You make it sound simple. It is simple. Kira. Zhen corrected. It is not easy, but it is simple. You go before the council. You tell them who humans are, what you want, what you offer. Then you see what happens. They talked for another hour about nothing important. Small things about their worlds, their lives. Lisa learned that Kira Zhen had 3 siblings, all warriors, 1 killed in battle. She learned that Zarathi children were raised communally by the entire community, not just parents. She learned that the Zarathi had a concept similar to poetry, though theirs was more about precise language than artistic expression. In turn, Lisa told Kira Zhen about Earth, about oceans, and mountains, about the diversity of human cultures, about music and art, and the strange human obsession with asking why the Zarathi leader listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she was really paying attention. When it was time to go to the council chamber, Kira Zhen walked with her. They moved through the corridors of Station Harmony, passing delegates from dozens of species. All of them stopped to stare at the human and Zarathi, walking together as if they were old friends. The council chamber was enormous. A circular room with seats rising in tiers around a central platform. Delegates from every member species filled the seats, hundreds of beings from across the galaxy. Representatives from the founding species sat in the front row, their positions marked by elaborate symbols. Lisa walked to the central platform, feeling every eye upon her. The platform was designed to make the speaker visible to everyone in the room. A spotlight focused on the center, making it impossible to see much of the audience beyond the first few rows. It was intimidating by design. The council speaker, a Thexian named Vorin, called the session to order. His voice carried through the chamber, amplified by technology. Commander Lisa. Morgan of Humanity has requested to address this council. We grant this request. Lisa stepped into the spotlight and began. I am not going to give you a typical speech. She said, her voice steady. I am not going to talk about trade agreements or military alliances or diplomatic protocols. You have heard those speeches 1,000 times. You do not need to hear them again from me. She paused, letting that sink in. Some delegates shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned forward with interest. I am going to tell you what I have learned since coming to this station. She continued. I have learned that most of you voted against allowing humans into the Galactic Council. You thought we were not ready. You thought we were too primitive, too aggressive, too risky. There were murmurs from the audience. Some delegates looked embarrassed. Others looked defiant, and maybe you were right. She said, maybe we were not ready. We barely had faster than light travel. We had no understanding of galactic politics. We were like children, stumbling into a room full of adults. The murmurs grew louder. Some delegates nodded in agreement. But here is what I want you to understand. Lisa said, her voice growing stronger. We did not come here because we thought we were ready. We came because we refused to wait. We came because sitting on Earth wondering about the galaxy was not enough. We needed to be part of it, even if we were not ready. She looked around the chamber, meeting as many eyes as she could. Humans have a saying. She continued, we say that you learn to swim by swimming, not by sitting on the shore watching others. You can study swimming forever, but until you get in the water, you will never really know how. We decided to get in the water. The chamber was completely silent. Now every delegate was listening. I know what you see when you look at humanity. She said, I know you see a young species barely out of its own star system. I know you see primitive technology and simple culture. I know some of you think we will fail, that we will cause problems, that allowing us into the council was a mistake. She paused for effect. You might be right. But I want to tell you what I see. When I look at the species in this chamber, I see beings who have forgotten what it is like to not know everything. I see cultures so old that they have lost their curiosity. I see species that are so comfortable they have stopped growing. The murmurs returned louder now. Some delegates looked angry, others looked thoughtful. Humanity is not comfortable, she said firmly. We do not know everything. We make mistakes. We fail. We get things wrong. But we keep trying. We keep learning. We keep growing, and maybe that is what the galaxy needs. A reminder that not knowing something is not a reason to stop it, is a reason to learn. Lisa felt her confidence growing. The Zarathi Empire recognized humanity yesterday, she continued, and I am grateful for that recognition. But whether you recognize us or not, whether you accept us or not, we are here. We are not going away. We are going to keep exploring, keep learning, keep trying to be better. And if that makes some of you uncomfortable, then maybe you need to ask yourselves why. She looked directly at the Krex delegation who had been most vocal in their opposition. I am not asking you to like us, she said. I am not asking you to trust us. I am asking you to work with us, to teach us, to learn from us. Because that is what this council is supposed to be about. Not politics, not power, but cooperation, growth, learning together. Lisa took a breath, preparing for her final words. A wise warrior once told me that courage is not the absence of fear, but acting despite it, she said, glancing toward where she knew Kira Zhen was sitting. Humanity is afraid. We are afraid of making mistakes, of failing, of being rejected. But we are here anyway. That is our offer to you. Not perfection, not expertise, but courage and curiosity. She stepped back from the center of the platform, signaling she was done. The chamber erupted. Some delegates were applauding, a sound that varied wildly between species. The Zarathi were pounding their fists on their seats, creating a thunderous rhythm. The Nix were singing a high-pitched tone of approval. Even some of the Krex were chittering, in what might have been reluctant respect, but others were clearly angry. The Thexian delegation sat in stony silence. The Vorlian trade minister looked displeased. Several smaller species seemed offended by her directness. Council Speaker Vorin stood, waiting for the noise to die down. The council thanks Commander Morgan for her address, he said formally. We will take her words under advisement. Lisa left the platform and walked through the chamber. Delegates parted to let her pass. Some nodded in respect. Others turned away. She did not care. She had said what needed to be said, outside the chamber. Kira Zhen was waiting. That, she said with clear approval, was very human. You challenged them. You made them uncomfortable. You spoke truth instead. Of diplomacy, Lisa felt exhausted. Did I just make everything worse? No, Kira Zhen said firmly. You made things different. Whether that is better or worse, time will tell. But you were honest. You were yourself. And that matters more than being liked. They stood together in the corridor as other delegates filed out. Some approached to congratulate Lisa. Others avoided her entirely. But everyone knew who she was now. Everyone knew what humanity stood for. And in that moment, Lisa realized something important. She had not just represented humanity. She had defined what it meant to be human in a galaxy full of ancient species.